Hey YouTube, Do-It-Yourself Junkie 369 here, and today is day 123 of our RV-10 build. Last video I ended on kind of a negative note. I just couldn't seem to do anything right, so rather than work and make some sort of mistake, I quit. And then I also took a day off yesterday. I did get the bearing that I had messed up ordered. I haven't looked to see if it's shipped yet. But we do have one that the threads are kind of just a little bit messed up on. So I've got a die in here to kind of recut those first couple of threads. And it's 3/8 by 24. And I'm cutting the threads on this. Don't ever cut the threads on a nut plate. Those are designed to be kind of tough to turn into, to act as sort of a lock type, almost like a lock nut. So I was real careful putting this on there, making sure I didn't cross thread it, because if you cross thread it, it'll cut new threads across your good threads, and we don't want that. And actually this isn't even the one that was, this actually was the messed up one where the bearing is actually not turning properly. This is the one that the threads are just slightly messed up at the end, and so I need a couple turns. Interestingly enough, all the rod end bearings supplied with this kit are the same thread pitch. There we go, that's much better. Now it should be just a matter of getting it screwed into this nut plate. Which, with all the stack up of parts, there is the possibility of having a slight misalignment and not being able to get this threaded in there, which it's kind of hard to go back in and drill out because you risk ruining your nut plate. And all of this isn't helped by the fact that this is has a stack up of 3 parts that could be misaligned. So really, you want to install a 3/8 by 24 bolt while you're bolting or riveting all those parts together. That would help minimize this problem. And that's what I have going on here. There's a misalignment of parts that is actually blocking off the thread, and you can't go in there and drill it. If I had maybe a drill press and a reamer, I could go in there real slow and take out some material. I don't have that either, so I'm going to have to try to use a Dremel and just be really careful. And really, I would not do this unless it was like an absolute last option. And just that little bit right there was enough to take care of the problem. And basically, you have to be real careful. I ran the Dremel at its variable speed. I ran it at almost its lowest setting. And I went in there and I just cleaned up the aluminum, getting nowhere near the nut plate. And I didn't take very much off. Basically, I made the reinforcement plate line up with the hole in the front rib here, or front spar here. Now I just got to figure out what I do for my rod end bearing, get that screwed in, and we can start adjusting these to the length that they need to be. Scam likely. Love this. If you have a scam call, don't even bother answering. It might be somebody just seeing if your number is valid and active. If you answer, they'll be confirmed, and then they'll be able to sell that number to somebody else for more money than if you don't answer. And I have T-Mobile and a new phone. I don't know if this is strictly a T-Mobile thing, but it tells me when phone numbers are likely scams. Usually I don't answer if it's somebody if I don't recognize the number or it's not programmed into my phone. If it's somebody that needs to get a hold of me for a legitimate reason, they can leave a message. Remember how I said the thread is 3/8 and 24? That's 24 threads per inch, which means every one rotation around, it moves it 1/24 of an inch in. If that helps you any when determining how many more turns you have to make. On this one, with the jam nut on there, set out as far as the jam nut can go, it is almost all the way in. Okay, now that that's all adjusted, I can go in and tighten these jam nuts. 9/16. And somebody had said that they had used a modified crow's foot. This is what I mean by a crow's foot. Quite honestly, I don't see it working unless I like welded something to the end to make it a lot longer. And then you can't use the dog's bone because the end of the dog bone is enclosed. So you might be able to modify dog bone. I don't know how well it would work, but basically imagine this closed-in wrench is the end of your dog bone. Basically, you need to cut a slot in it to allow it to slip over this and then to move to your jam nut. The only problem is you're going to actually be coming in from up here, slipping over, and then trying to orient it right to get over your jam nut. I think that would work. And you'd still have enough there to grip your jam nut. And you can find that torque in this book. It's the AC43. I don't know exactly where it is, but I did look it up. And you'd think that those would be in tension, so you torque it to that because the nut is pulling on the bolt against the aircraft skin, but really those thin jam nuts, you want to torque them as if they were in shear, and so that'll be 110 inch-pounds. By the way, you should never memorize torques. You should always look up and verify. I don't have a 9/16 dog bone to modify, and I'm not going to weld and fab something out of this wrench. So one thing you can do is put your wrench on there and get a scale and pull on the end of the wrench, and for that to work you need to do some math, and you also need to measure some stuff. And the measurement you need to know is here from the center line of this nut when it's in the wrench, so up here, all the way down to the center of where your scale is pulling, and you need to measure that, and then take that 110 inch-pounds and divide it by the number of inches of length that you come up with, and that's the reading on your scale that you need. And when you're pulling, you need to make sure you're pulling tangent to the circle that the wrench would travel. So basically 90 degrees to the center out to here. And since this end of the wrench is angled down, you got to make sure where your 90 is. You need to create a line between those 2 points and pull 90 to that line, not necessarily 90 to the wrench. And on my particular wrench, that looks like 5.8 inches. Actually 5.75. 110 divided by 5.75. I need my scale to read 19.13 pounds to achieve the proper torque on those jam nuts. And while doing that, you also need to make sure that your rod end bearing doesn't twist. And that's what it looks like torquing one of those jam nuts. For this bottom one, you could actually get a wrench in there fairly easily, a crow's foot anyway. I'm waiting on that fitting that was messed up, this rod end bearing. There's a mark in it, and then it doesn't spin freely like it should. While I'm waiting for that, I can go ahead and torque the hardware for the elevator mounts, because I'm leaving that mounted to the horizontal stabilizer. For the rudder, I just have the hardware on there loose because I'm going to have to separate it from the vertical stabilizer when I take it apart because of the bolt here and the bolt here. And as always, torque stripe immediately after torquing to verify that I did it. That's the only time that I apply torque stripe, is immediately after torquing. That way I don't torque stripe something I haven't torqued thinking that I already applied torque to it once. Now I have to torque this center. Basically, working on aircraft is just playing around with different tools until you get a setup that works for what you're trying to achieve. And after you torque this one in the middle, when you move the elevators, you want to see the nut and bolt rotate with the elevator horns and stay in position relative to those. If they're moving separately, then it means that your bolt is spinning and acting as the pivot point rather than the bearing that's in between the elevator horns. Almost forgot, there's jam nuts on these too that need to be tightened. Sometimes you can hold those rod end bearings with a wrench to keep them straight. In this case, with the smaller ones, it's easier to gently stick a flathead screwdriver in the space between the bearing and the brace just to keep it from rotating. And that works pretty good. Just don't like force it in there, just kind of set it in there to maintain that gap. Since I'm done working with this, I can go ahead and just hang it back up. misplacing hardware. I just temporarily put all the bolts, nuts, and washers back here on the mount points. So I had a 5/8 deep well that basically had a 7/16 radius that allowed me to mark out this piece that I was working on. I like drilling my holes in pieces before I make them tiny. That way I have something to hold on to while I'm drilling, and it doesn't, the drill bit is less likely to catch and yank it out of my hands and hurt myself. And this one's going to be especially tough because it's a 7/16 hole, and the largest drill bit I have in my set goes up to 1/2 inch. And then the next largest is 3/8, which would be 6/16. So I don't have anything in between, but I do have this step drill. The only deal is, usually these are for cutting on thinner metal than what I'm about to use it for. Basically, I'm going to drill as large as I can with the normal drill bit. I'm going to start with 1/4 inch and then step up to 3/8 and then use my step drill. And by leaving it in a big piece while I drill this initial hole, hopefully I reduce my risk of injury.
Okay guys, that's where I'm going to end this one. I almost have this trim tab servo bracket complete. The two pieces that attach here, you might have seen me drilling out the rivets. I had put the wrong size rivet in there, they were too short. I also managed to put the heads on the wrong side. But the more major issue is, when I drilled these brackets, I thought it was okay because both times my 1/4" drill bit drifted to the right just a little bit, but did it equal, and I thought it was going to be okay. The problem is, one bracket gets flipped around, so now that one is really drifting to the right and the other is really drifting to the left, causing a misalignment. And when I put this bracket in here and get everything running parallel to these cuts, what happens is when you try to put the bolt through, the bolt's going at an angle and it causes a whole bunch of binding. So I have to go figure out what I'm going to do. I might have to order a new piece of aluminum to make this because there's only enough material left to make one. So I guess stand by for what I'm going to do with that. The other thing I'm going to go do is go inside and read the instructions for the trim servo, because as I read online somewhere, when you're putting this thing together, it looks like that cam can cycle lower than the bracket itself, which it can't do. So I don't want the servo like bottoming out when I test it, especially since I don't have a positioning system. I mean, it looks like there's one in there, but basically I need to read the instructions and make sure that when I'm applying power to this, is it going to stop automatically, or am I supposed to be setting up and programming stops? So I want to make sure not to screw up that servo, because it's about 300 bucks to get another one. So I'm going to be researching that some too. And it seems like trim tabs are what everybody's concerned about online, or at least the stuff that I just randomly read through. Especially with such a big elevator, I've heard of people getting their trim tab set up wrong and it actually twisting the stabilizer, the horizontal stabilizer. As hard as that is to imagine. But there's a lot of authority, and I know like at low speeds, the speed, that thing moves its full throw in about 22 seconds. On higher speeds, when you're flying at speed and you try to use your trim tab, if you hold it down too long, you go into a really, really eye-opening climb, from what I've heard. So I definitely want to do my research and make sure I get this thing right. We're getting into something that is really important. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did. As always, if you enjoyed the channel, think about subscribing. It helps me out a lot. There's stuff that I do besides airplane build. I'm hoping to get in and releasing some of my flight sim stuff that I wanted to do. And then actually, hopefully, show you guys some videos of me actually flying, not just building an airplane. I need to go back out and get current. In the description below, there's my builder's log. Like always, it's the most up-to-date thing showing you where I'm actually at. Feel free to steal that and use it as your own. I'll do a video at some point going over that more in depth. And I'll also show a way to like link in videos or pictures so that you can just have that in your build log. And if you want to see a picture of something, you click the link next to that log entry and it'll pull it up. Which I like it, and it's free, which is always a big plus when you're dealing with something as expensive as this. If you do decide to build a Vans aircraft, please feel free to use my builder's number below. When you order your Empennage kit, Vans will send me $100. I will say right now they are really backlogged, it seems, between demand, supply, and a whole bunch of other stuff that you all are probably already aware of. And as always, thanks for watching.